Now we're on.
Hey, wait. Where the fuck's the music? Johnny? You're supposed to get music in on this one. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll run with it. Woo, welcome to Sovereign Tech. It is I, the Golden Stallion, the man of tomorrow, Savzu, the rated R radio star, the thriller. That is Savzilla, baby. And, Of course, if you listen to the live Q&A hangout that I did on Patreon this past week, someone called me Rabbi, Rabbi Sovereign. Oh, no. No, I don't know how much I'm going to run with that one, but whatever. I guess I'm honored. Anyway. Do we have a lot to get into this week? Actually, a couple of huge... I'm going to do, for a couple segments, I'm actually going to concentrate on listener feedback and listener questions within this one. But I assure you they're great ones, and they're conversations that I think are either important or interesting or need to be had. And then a little later, too, and I dare not say these kinds of things are ever interesting, okay, because... Well, I'm an anarchist, folks, and politics, I mean, that just gives me a rubbery one. I can't get behind that. But there was an interesting conclusion made by a California judge that we are going to talk about. Of course, that'll be during HackSec. We'll get into that. But why don't we open up with our story of the week? And it's by a guy who, Sovereign Tech is a fairly popular podcast. Average out about maybe 15,000 listeners a week or so. In the podcast realm, believe me, I know there are people who would do very dastardly things to have those kinds of numbers, so I'm honored by it. But a guy who, I'll admit, has a bigger podcast than I do is Ezra Klein. And Ezra Klein, he actually does a podcast for a media outlet called Vox, that's basically a media outlet. And he wrote up a story back in November of 2018 that I thought was very interesting. I want to break into it. I want to talk about it, but it speaks to maybe some underlying themes that have been going on Sovereign Tech for a little while now, certainly throughout the year of 2018. Of course, now we're into 2019. And so, let's set precedent here, maybe by slowing down. No, I mean, I don't know that I'm going to necessarily, or that Sovereign Tech's going to slow down, but maybe we'd all do well to, maybe reconsider our relationship a lot with technology and the internet and so on. And that's sort of what Ezra Klein is getting at here. The story's titled "The Case for Slowing Everything Down a Bit. A top tech exec thinks we need to slow down the internet a bit." He's right. Again, this is according to Ezra Klein, who I do recommend. I mean, his podcast is fairly interesting. Depends on the guest. And I have personally, I don't want to get lost in the weeds on this comment, this subject, but I'm not the biggest fan of shows where they have guests. I mean, if you have co-hosts, that's one thing, but when you just do guests, I feel like that I'm not as impressed by the hosts if all they ever do is just have guests on, because no, I want to listen to somebody who's really put together a very cohesive narrative and whole in what they're presenting every week or so. But anyway, sometimes I can dig what Ezra Klein does. Well, let's read the story here. Justin Kostlin leads product management at Jigsaw, the Google Alphabet, and thank you. Okay. I talked about this on a recent Patreon Wednesday Q&A, which is a point that I reiterated back, 2014, whenever Alphabet started, when that became the parent company, that it is, shall we say, what would you call it, journalistic dishonesty? If you claim that, say, the company Jigsaw, which is part of Google, but underneath Alphabet, okay, and really Alphabet is just Google. Let's be 100% clear on that, okay? But that if you don't keep in mind that Google and Alphabet are really the same thing, and that all of these companies are completely interconnected and absolutely do share data sets with each other, I think we're going to run into a world of trouble if we forget that, because we should always pay attention to the fact that all of this is going to all of this data, whatever company happens to be, Jigsaw, whatever happens to be, will feed into Google's ultimate aims, or Alphabet's ultimate aims. I used to call it AlphaGoog, because again, I don't want you to forget that all of these companies are still ultimately Google. It's still one giant company. Don't think that they're smaller companies. This is still a very real concern. So anyway, but thank you, Ezra Klein, for saying that, or for calling it Google, or at least recognizing that it's Google/Alphabet. But let's read on. So anyway, Justin Kostlin leads product management at Jigsaw, the Google subsidiary working on technological solutions to problems like online censorship and radicalization. Before that, he worked at Google News, Google Plus, and Google AdSense. The experience must have radicalized him a bit, because in an essay published at Motherboard, he takes direct aim at not just one of Silicon Valley's founding assumptions, but one of his parent company's core business strategies. Quote, "The philosophy of the internet has assumed that friction is always part of the problem," end quote, writes Kostlin. But look around. The problem now isn't too much friction, it's too little. Quote, "It's time to bring friction back," end quote, he says. So Stanley, breaking in for a second. Friction is the idea of, say you want to access a song online. If you have to go through more than one click, if you can't, however, friction is the amount of clicks and actions that you have to take to achieve your goal online. That's what they mean by friction. I mean, and friction actually could apply in other types of business, not just, internet, not just online. But that's the basic concept of friction, is something getting between you and your ability to achieve the end or goal that you're going for. So reading on, our digital lives dispense with friction. We get the answers we seek instantly. We keep up with friends without speaking to them. We get the news as it happens. We watch loops of videos an algorithm chose for us. We click once and get any product in the world delivered to our doorsteps in less than 2 days. Less friction means more time spent, more ads seen, emphasis mine, more sales made. Tech companies lose customers during login screens and security verification, and as a result of slow load times. The country's top computer science talent is paid billions of dollars to further reduce the milliseconds of delay separating our desires and their fulfillment. But these technological wonders do not seem to have made our lives or societies more wonderful. Depression, anxiety, loneliness, drug overdoses, and suicide are rising. Productivity growth has slowed. Income inequality has skyrocketed. Politics is more bitter and more tribal. Donald Trump is president of the United States. Something is wrong. Woo! I'll say. Kostlin is focused on digital threats, malware, phishing, disinformation. All of these, he says, quote, exploit high-velocity networks of computers and people, end quote. But I wonder about the whole damn thing, whether it's all gotten so fast and so easy and so frictionless that we're on an endless slip and slide down the chute of our own worst impulses. So here's the subheader: harder, angrier, faster, lonelier. I mean, Stanley, breaking in for a second on this. Let's be clear here. This is basically, at first blush, what it's bringing up here is what I call the 10th law of thermodynamics, which is there's always a trade-off between convenience and security. The more convenient or frictionless something is, the less security you have. Tech companies are concerned that, oh shit, if we have to implement two-factor authentication, if we implement this, if we implement the use of YubiKeys, technologies that have been around for like a decade, or maybe a little less, but you get my point. If we implement that, it's going to create friction, and we're going to lose people to a service that's easier and they don't have to think about. Well, where's the real problem there? I mean, yes, the problem is that the companies aren't saying, no, you know what, security is paramount. We're just going to have to teach people. The problem, so there's the problem there, but it's twofold in that also the problem is that people are just not fucking willing to slow it down and to say, okay, no, security matters. If I have to go through an extra annoying step to make sure that my data is not going to leak or I'm not going to get phished or whatever, we should do it. Okay, fair enough. Anyway, let's keep reading on. The subheader was harder, angrier, faster, lonelier. I'll start with media because that's the space I know best. I've been digital since day one. I was a blogger before I was a journalist, and I've always preferred publishing online to publishing in print. It was, frictionless. You wrote something, you press publish, and there it was. But as I look around today, I find myself yearning for a bit more of the friction of yesteryear. Twitter is almost perfectly frictionless. No editors, no formatting, built for instant reaction and in-group applause. And Trump is the result. YouTube, with its recommendation algorithm automatically directing us to more extreme content, is a powerful force for radicalization. Cable news is fast, reactive, competitive, and thus sensationalistic, tribal, and conflictual. Friction creates space in the system where judgment can intercede, where second thoughts can be had, where decisions can be made. Look at organizations with longer time lags and more editors, and you get better, calmer, and more considered coverage. I believe that one reason podcasts have exploded is that they carry so much friction. They're long and messy. They often take weeks or months to produce. They're hard to clip and share and skim. And as a result, they're calmer, more human, more judicious, less crazy-making. Too much friction can be annoying. There are plenty of days I feel like posting something without waiting for an edit, and much news needs to be known quickly, but too little friction can be dangerous. It leads to reporting and commentary that's reactive, ill-considered, wrong. I wouldn't want to go back to the media of the 50s, but I don't want to double down on the trends of the present either. Stanley breaking in for a second. I've said this many times on Sovryn Tech that I don't like to always, report. In fact, most of the time I don't want to report immediately. Like if a story happens hot that morning, you find out about some like Facebook exploit or leak or something like that. Let's sit on it for a second, because first off, there's not a whole shit ton you can do. And if there is, I would tell you immediately, of course. Okay, but there's not a whole shit ton you can do. And we don't know the reality of the situation. We got to take time, figure out what exactly happened. Otherwise, all that happens is people just will, say to themselves, oh, it's the fucking Russians, which again, I think is ridiculous. It's become it's the renewed catch-all. It's like we're in the 1980s again or something, yep, just blame everything on Russia. Okay. And then we never have to actually blame the companies or the U.S. government itself, never have to blame corporatism for the very real problem that they themselves really created. Yeah, the Russian excuse. I get tired of it. Anyway, so reading on. Let's put politics and media with its unique dynamics aside. Socializing is frictionless online. It's far easier to click around on Facebook than to plan a hike with a friend, a movie with a cousin, a day out of the house. It's easier, but is it making us more connected? The answer, empirically, is no. A new study paid people to limit their use of major social media platforms to 10 minutes a day and compared them to a control group that didn't make any changes. The result? Quote, participants who reduced their time on social sites saw a statistically significant decrease in depression and loneliness, end quote, reports the Verge's Casey Newton. Quote, the control group did not report an improvement, end quote. Then there's distraction. I feel it myself right now writing this piece. It is frictionless to click over to edit to my email or click over to Reddit to my email to any of a million sites that will take my mind off of the work of writing a column and refocus it on the easy sugar water of social media and viral content and Slack conversation. Writing, by contrast, is full of friction. It's hard and slow, and the words on the page fall short of the music and clarity I imagine they'd have, but it is, in the end, rewarding. It's where I have at least a chance to create something worth creating. The work is worth it. Now, I want to stop there for a second. First off, I get so many people standing here. I get so many people saying, Stallion, I really miss you on social media. Could you come back on social media? Could you, post again? Like, and hell, it feels like there's even, people reaching out to me like, oh, are you okay? And I've said this on other episodes elsewhere where I'm like, when people ask me because I haven't posted on social media if I'm all right, I want to say, wait, you have been posting on social media. Are you okay? I'm worried about you. You're posting on social media. I think you have a psychological condition. No, I don't mean that across the board, but you get my point. Look, folks, I'm going to say this, and I have one more comment, then we'll keep reading. Consider it a kindness that I am not on social media, because if I were, oh, you don't know what would come out of my frantic typing. You don't know what would come out of my mouth. I mean, there are so many people, actually, as many people as wish I was on there. I bet there are as many people happy that I am not on there, causing them a whole bunch of headache. It is a kindness that I am not there, because look, I don't mean to pat myself on the back, but I am really fucking good at social media. And social media breeds certain, read the works of like Jerome Lanier, and well, he brings up the point. Social media breeds a certain mindset, and it gets people acting up a certain way, kind of like what Ezra Klein here is talking about, radicalization and so many other things. Okay. I know how to play that game really fucking well. Okay. So again, be glad. If I ever did come back, rue the day. Anyway. Now, the other point I want to bring up is something I've talked about many times, is that the beauty of getting knowledge, not from news sources, not from social media or blogs, but getting it from books that actually take time, you understand, to, like you have to put together a complete case. It takes years to write it. And so you get to chew the information instead of just swallow it whole. And I think that's really, really important today, that gets done. I mean, especially today when everything, again, is going so fast. A good solid book, 300, 400 pages, whatever. Oh, it takes you a while to read? I don't know. Well, then get it on Audible, okay, and listen to it at 2.5x if you need to. But a book that takes time to write and to be really well thought out, you're just going to get a much richer bit of information. And you can say, yeah, but I'm missing out on this story, missing out on this story. Look, the world's still here. You're not missing out on shit. Do you even remember what you read this time of day that you're listening to this now, a week ago? No. You might have thought it was the most important fucking thing at the time, and maybe you even tweeted about it or did something about it on social media, and it doesn't matter. It absolutely doesn't matter. The world's still going. Your car is still driving. Nobody's crossing that piece of paint between, or the paint between in the middle of the road. There's no chaos. Everything's okay. You can take in information much slower, and believe me, the world will be just fine. But let's read on with the story here. This isn't a new problem, of course. It's always easier to play a video game than to craft a presentation, but the ease and availability of distractions has skyrocketed with smartphones and broadband connections, while doing hard, productive work remains as maddening as ever. Dan Nixon, an economist at the Bank of England, has suggested that the slow productivity growth across economies reflects the growing ease of distraction, which is overwhelming the gains of new technologies. Quote, distractions can directly reduce the quality of our work, end quote, he writes. Quote, an influx of emails and phone calls, for example, is estimated to reduce workers' IQ by 10 points, equivalent to losing a night's sleep, end quote. Now, Stanley, breaking in for a second again. IQ is those are some funny numbers. I don't know, IQ is a very questionable thing to even say is valid, but I imagine there is an overall point that has some validity within that. It's you get people screaming, they're stealing our jobs and all this shit, right? And it's like, no, your smartphone's stealing your mind. You're not even working, How much are you getting done in a day? And in fact, that's such a brilliant point to bring up because, you talk about, there's economic slowdown. People are making less money, blah, blah, blah. Well, I mean, how many people, and I'm not saying work is any kind of grand virtue, okay, but how many people are just, not getting as much done just because of the constant distractions around them? I mean, and that can apply to work. That can apply to your fucking personal life. That can apply to your love life. That can apply to all kinds of things that's going on. The issue with distractions and how, as Ezra points out, smartphones have made that has made distraction completely frictionless. Reading on with the story. Worse, there's evidence that all of this is changing our brains, making them resist long periods of focus and crave more distraction. Quote, if every moment of potential boredom in your life, say having to wait 5 minutes in line or sit alone in a restaurant until a friend arrives, is relieved with a quick glance at your smartphone, then your brain has likely been rewired, end quote, writes computer scientist Cal Newport in Deep Work. Here's the next subheader. Digital distraction isn't an accident. It's a business strategy. When Facebook sends you a notification saying someone has tagged you in a picture, or when Twitter pings to say someone has mentioned you in a comment, they're giving you a spike of anxiety and anticipation that raises the friction of not checking the platform. Cutting-edge behavioral science is being applied to the problem of how to make you pay less attention to your surroundings and more attention to your phone. So too is cutting-edge lobbying. The blockbuster New York Times story on Facebook's political tactics reveals a company paying off high-priced opposition researchers to make sure regulators don't try to add the friction individual users don't have the power to apply themselves. And yet the world is full of friction that we recognize as valuable, much of it enforced by laws and regulations. Seatbelts in cars, restrictions on opioid prescriptions, banisters on stairwells. Silicon Valley, however, has developed a culture that prizes our instant impulses and erases the space we use to question them. And the result is, well, the world we live in. Trump isn't just the president, he's also the perfect symbol of our age, a frictionless id, a Twitter account in human form, a man devoid of the shame, social caution, and second thoughts that curb most people's worst impulses. Quote, the internet is facing real challenges on many fronts, end quote, Google's Koslin concludes. Quote, if we truly want to solve them, engineers, designers, and product architects could all benefit from the thoughtful application of friction, end quote. Change needs to come, but I'm skeptical it will come from the employees of companies that get richer by greasing the path between our impulses and their profits. Rather, it's going to have to come from us rediscovering the value of things being a little slower and a little less efficient. Wow. So that's the end of the story there. Okay, one thing I want to get out of the way here. Before somebody say, oh, it's the fucking leftists, blah, 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 that are causing all the... Yeah. No, usually it's the leftists within Google and Facebook and these other companies that are arguing against the business models and the business practices of the very companies that they work for or that they just end up leaving. And that's been happening too. We've reported on that where, there are internal and look, I mean, these companies are so huge, they're pretty much minor countries. So they're just going through the democratic process, right? And if you're one of those staunch defenders of Western civilization, whatever the fuck that means, we might talk about that later. If you're one of the staunch defenders of that, okay, well, they're going through the democratic process to try and change things. I don't know how much you want to say that they're exactly leftists. Regardless of that, the leftists are the ones that are usually complaining about these business practices, and it's the tech execs, it's the people that you hold up as, we wouldn't have, only Western civilization could create these technologies, which is bullshit. Japan could, and they're not Western. Western civilization could do this. With Mark Zuckerberg, and Larry Page, and all of that crap, right? They're the ones that are actually destroying in a very real way our ability to process information, our minds. If you believe in, if you're one of those Western civilization types that believes that IQ is a thing, guess what? These companies that you hold up as the banner children of Western civilization, they're destroying IQ. They are. And it's not the leftists that work for them. They're the ones that are leaving the companies because they're sick of what their company's doing. And they recognize it. Give me a fucking break, you simpleton arguments. I mean, fuck, is this what you're trying to save when you say we got to save Western civilization? You want to save this system that turns people into just fucking mindless, frictionless consumption machines? That's so weird. I thought there was more to life than that. I'm pretty sure I read Herodotus, some of those ancient Greek people that supposedly all that's based on. I'm pretty sure I read from them that there's a lot more to life than, just buying and selling and, checking Facebook. Well, I mean, not that they would have talked about that, but you get my point. What exactly are you defending? We're going to talk more about the Western civilization thing later. It's just a little preview, okay? But when I hear that, when I say, we got to save it, we got to defend it, and what I'm really at, when I say I don't know what the fuck Western civilization means, I actually kind of have an idea. In fact, a Sovereign Tech listener sent me something, that might be a little bit of a description. Well, again, we're going to talk about that later, okay? But maybe more accurately, what I'm asking is, what exactly are you talking about defending? I get what Western civilization supposedly means, but what are you talking about defending? Regardless of that, you say, well, wait a minute, this is a tech show. How did this turn into Western civilization? Well, you'll have to listen to that later on in the show. But the point I want to get to with this is I agree with Ezra Klein. This shit needs to, we have to slow down the rate at which we process things, the rate at which we do things. It's a maddening world right now, and in fact, I'm not against, doing business globally or anything like that, or interacting with, obviously, kind of the Western civilization thing. I'm all about interacting with other cultures. I've done so many times in my life, and you find out everybody's really just human. Okay. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. But with our persistent interconnectedness, and keyword, persistent interconnectedness, we've created a world where, look, I know, okay, I have clients that I deal with in Japan. I have clients that I deal with all around the world. And they think that, I'm always on. They think I'm always available 24 hours a day. Oh, fuck, they could send me something at 4 a.m. in the morning, and I go to bed at 3, so, they're not too far. No, I'm kidding. But, they could send me something at 4 a.m. in the morning, and if I'm not in touch with them at 4:05 a.m. while I'm fucking sleeping, they think their world's ending. And it's like, wait, what? We have created a complete... And look... It's not just the internet. Granted, this was also all plausible with phones and, with regular landline phones, this kind of shit was going down. Okay. But we as a species, not even as a civilization, we really do. We got to slow the fuck down because we are ending up with the worst decisions ever. Okay. Like the asshat that's in office in Washington right now. And honestly, every asshat, because all politicians are scum, around the world. Because I think if people could slow down, if they could think for a moment, if they weren't so reactionary to everything that CNN or take your pick of the fucking news organization, Fox, whatever, that's schlepping onto them, maybe they'd realize, hey, we actually don't need these people that that claim to be protecting us, or that claim to be over us, or are solving problems, because maybe they're problems that they created themselves. If people could slow down, I bet they could think about that. They could chew on what's happening around them. Or maybe they could have more empathy for literally their neighbor, the person right next to them. And maybe then they wouldn't be so concerned about these fucking, stupid border arguments and whatever else, because they know the other person over there, oh, look, they're working the field just like me. They're farming just like me. Or shit, they're not that different. Hell, they worship Christ just like I do. I don't worship, I'm an atheist, but you get my point. Just human beings. But our reality, we're not actually looking at reality, or so many of us are not looking at reality anymore. We're looking at what we're told is reality. We're looking at what the internet says is what's going on. And because it's so frictionless to do so, and because we can't sit there, like Ezra said, for 5 minutes waiting for a friend to show up at a restaurant, we're just constantly taking in all this horse shit, and it completely skews reality. It's not reality at all. It's what they're telling you is reality. We got to slow down. Slow it way down. I've talked about this before. I said, I've gotten into reading magazines because at least it's a little more current event than a book. I don't have to wait 2 years or something for it to come out. But at the same time, it's, like a month. It's a monthly thing. And that has, at the very least, some degree of time spent on writing it and making sure that, this is the right stuff. And there's actually an editor there. It's not somebody who's just off running their mouth. I mean, there's plenty of great things about that. Slow it down so we can actually think about shit, process shit, and everything's going to be all right. Stop falling for the news of the minute. That is the basic premise that I'm giving to you here. Okay? Slow it down. And boy, if you can, I don't agree with the concept of IQ as most people understand it. Okay? But, if you do and you want to save some IQ points, well, research is in. You could save 10 IQ points a day just by not getting on social media. How about that thought? Anyway, I'll be right back with some more Sovryn Tech. Woo! Let us slow it down. Hey, wow. You want to hear a show where you can talk about anything like that? You got to go to freetalklive.com, and you are going to listen to a show that's been going on for over a decade. 7 days a week, 3 hours a night, the number 27 talk show in the United States, and really the only libertarian radio show out there. And so, that means you can talk about whatever the hell you want to talk about. Free speech, right? Anyway, go check it out, freetalklive.com. You're guaranteed, you don't know what you're going to hear. Any night that you listen to that show, you just have no idea, because those phone lines are open, baby. You want to check it out, and I mean it. You can talk about anything. I was a co-host on there for 2 years. You got to check it out. freetalklive.com. Woo!
HackSec.
It is time for HackSec, where we talk issues of hacking and security. And we'll see what we have time for, because I really, really want to have that Western civilization conversation a little later on in the show here. But I did get a question into SoundCloud, of all things, which was really cool. It's been a long time since I had someone ask me a question through like the SoundCloud private messenger or on a SoundCloud sound in general. So I really appreciate that. And when I got it, I was like, well, talk about friction, right? There's a reason that not many people would ever message me on SoundCloud, because there's some friction involved with that, unless you're already maybe listening to the sound on there. But even then, there can be a degree of friction. So I really appreciate it. I want to respect the question, and it's a great question. It's a great subject to bring up. Because I'm very much into semantics. I'm very much into words have meaning, and what are those meanings? So here it is. I'm gonna read this. I'm listening to episode 307, titled "The End." Right now, and I feel I must strongly disagree with your opinion. Ooh, I love it. Seriously, I do love it when people disagree. Strongly disagree with your opinion that we should go back to calling the internet cyberspace once it is free. That makes no sense etymologically. The Greek root cyber means government. Okay, so let's talk about this. Now, this person's not wrong in that, yes, the way that the term cyber had been used, really historically, going way back, it was a reference to governance of some type. Now, really how the term cyber, came into, shall we say, modern parlance, goes back to about the 1940s. There was a mathematician named Norbert Wiener who wrote the book, who wrote the book Cybernetics. And in that, he used the term cyber. He did use it in the sense of governance, because what he was referencing was at the time, which is a really far out idea, a self-governing system, a self-governing computer, meaning a computer system that ran on feedback. And so, sure, like the initial use of the term cyber absolutely referenced a computer system. In that sense, I mean, cyberspace, in reference to the internet, does fall in with even his use, Wiener's use of the definition of it being a self-governing system in a or not just self-governing, but self-resolving, as in the processes are largely automated or even algorithmic and so on. And certainly today, the internet is very much, or the World Wide Web more specifically perhaps, is very much governed. Yes, by governments, via laws and regulations, no doubt, but also, through algorithms themselves. Now, fast forward to the 1980s and the 90s, where, thanks to movies, think of like Blade Runner and some others, where this, and of course, William Gibson's classic book, Necromancer, still a tremendous book. I love that book, and Gibson's work in general. Where he would use it, he pretty much coined the term cyberspace. And in fact, there's a great quote from him about, just using the term cyber. He's like, cyber is such a perfect prefix. This is the quote. Cyber is such a perfect prefix because nobody has any idea what it means. It can be grafted onto any old word to make it seem new and cool, and therefore strange and spooky. And that's the thing, is that I don't know how much William Gibson even thought about, his use of the term cyber. Now, it took off because of the popularity of the cyberpunk genre, especially in the early 90s, and with the internet coming into play, that's where, cyberspace became more of a thing, and where it found its ultimate use in the 90s, which I grant you is wholly different from today, how it's used, but its ultimate use in the 90s, which was for cyber sex. In fact, some people argue that if smartphones, if like the iPhone came out, say, in the 90s, it probably would have been called a cyber phone and not a smartphone, to differentiate it from cell phones, which did exist at the time. And I think that's pretty true. That probably would have happened. I mean, you'd slap the word cyber on fucking anything, right? And cyber sex, now, I was there in the 90s, and I am a big fan, still a huge fan of cyber sex. And back then, you just used the term, you didn't even use the word cyber sex eventually. Eventually, you just said, hey, you want a cyber? And it was kind of an insider's way of knowing if the person knew what the hell you were talking about. Cyber really had only that meaning. Now, grant you that a lot of terms for engaging in sex of any type are seemingly by their nature very ephemeral, right? Like you think back to Catcher in the Rye, and where, it's called giving the time. Nobody says giving the time anymore. And that was that was only used for maybe a decade. It's one of the first things, if you ever have somebody read The Catcher in the Rye, which I think is a great book, if you ever have somebody read it, you have to explain to them, wait, what's the time? Because even within the book, it doesn't explain it very well. They just accept that that's how it is. So terms for sex, can certainly be ephemeral, and just change by the day, it almost seems. Granted, the primal, what's the term I'm looking for here? The primal nature of the word fuck, the primal elements of fuck, seem to make it, pretty much immortal as far as that use, but a lot of terms do come and go. Now, today, I grant you, cyber, whenever you think cyber, you almost instantaneously think cyber warfare or cybersecurity, and just instantaneously. Now, I don't think anyone would really argue that cybersecurity which is a completely accepted term, it's in the dictionary and so on, that is somehow referencing government security. I mean, it can. Cybersecurity is certainly something that governments put in place, but obviously that is a very, very privatized industry and so on. So my argument, so you're not wrong. And because of the nature of that, I could kind of see your point that, well, it means government, but it is a term that has dramatically shifted in use. So, in fact, really, like the reason that I argue for the term cyberspace is that I want it to be related more to cybersecurity, which is a very goddamn good thing, and cybersex, which I also think is a very, very goddamn good thing. All right? And so if we can relate the internet to those two actions, security and sex, phenomenal. All right, like that would be really great. But there is also cyber warfare, which definitely brings the government back into the term cyber. And that is becoming a more and more popular term, that's for sure. So, yeah, I can really respect, I can appreciate where you're coming from on that. I will say, though, if we can't, and I'm not saying you can't say that I can't use it that way, but I'm just saying that if we're not going to use the term cyber because it has the root in government, I think maybe even terms like governance and so on, like we need to throw those out as well. And I'm not opposed to that. I'm not opposed to, just like, I've said for years that, like, I've consulted for companies, and companies have said, yeah, like in their phrasing, they'll say, that they're an international company. And I say, no, say global. Because like you're recognizing nations as being valid or something if you do that. And the companies would actually be like, oh, wow, what a great point. That's a really nice edge you're putting on our company there. So I'm all about getting rid of references, even within etymology, to government. So I appreciate what you're saying. Yeah, I'm not that married to the use cyberspace, so we'll ditch it. Hey, baby, I know. You are tired of Gmail. You have had enough. Well, I have a solution for you. What I want you to do is you go to Fastmail, okay? It's fastmail.zog.ninja. That's the URL you can use. You're going to get a discount with that. You are going to love this. This is email for email's sake. This company does nothing more. Just email, and they do it right. All the latest security technologies. You want to log into your account with your YubiKey? You can do that. Fastmail has your hookup. Very inexpensive plans. I want you to check it out. You go to fastmail.sovryn.com. That'll get you the hookup, and it's an honor to have them as a part of Sovryn Tech. Woo! Let's get back to the show.
The Climax.
See how that worked? My mind has been changed. You can change my mind. How about that? So I tell people that all the time. I'm like, no, really, you can convince me of alternatives, of other things. And I get your point. Point taken. And I like precision. I love precision in language. So sure, cyber doesn't have to be a part of the game. But it's tough to, what else do we call cybersex, right? I suppose that's, I'll put it to you. If people want to email me with alternative terms for online textual sex or whatever, what you could say, because it's not, teledildonics doesn't exactly work, right? Virtual reality sex could be a thing, but I don't know, you don't want to call it internet sex. That kind of, internet is, that's part of why cyber took off in the 90s, because internet is such like a kind of an ugly, dumb word. And in fact, talk about something that's been fucked with endlessly. Because internet, now when you say internet, people think it just means the World Wide Web. When, again, as I point out often on the show, internet is a multitude of protocols. It's email, which is SMTP. It's IRC. It's Usenet. It's not just, HTTP. It's not just the World Wide Web. So that's a pretty important distinction to make as well. All right, let's get into the conversation that I want to have here. And this is, so I'm kind of known for saying this, okay? In recent years, there have been certain figureheads, shall we say, that have gotten on this real kick about, we got to take care of Western civilization. We got to save Western civilization, blah, blah, blah. And I was pretty much trying to figure out, okay, well, what do you mean by that? Like, what's the definition? What exactly are we trying to save here? Now, when I say that, I actually have a very good idea of what most people, it's really sort of a shifting term. Okay. But like what most people consider Western civilization to be, I do have an idea. But a Sovryn Tech listener actually emailed me something from the Yaron Brooks show, which Yaron Brooks is, who is he, the head of like AFI? Look, I'm not, I'm actually kind of a fan of Ayn Rand. In fact, years ago, I was very much a fan of Ayn Rand. Atlas Shrugged, Fountainhead. I think Fountainhead's a tremendous book to this day. And I'm very familiar with Yaron Brooks' stuff. He hasn't come out with a whole ton of books, but I've read his work often enough. And so, anyway, I'm going to cut to the audio of Yaron Brooks talking about what exactly Western civilization is and so on. His interpretation of it. So anyway, okay, let's go to the audio on that.
Okay, everyone other than us being us, me and a few other people, identifies Western civilization with Christendom. And the best current work of our civilization comes from South Korea. I guess he's talking about technology and automobiles and things like that. Isn't it time to switch to human civilization or just civilization? Yeah, civilization is good. The only thing is you want to differentiate it. Because there have been lots of civilizations in history. Western civilization does not refer to where that civilization is thriving today. Indeed, in many respects, Western civilization is doing better in Asia than it is in Europe and the United States. It's in decline in Europe and the United States. Western civilization relates, in my view, to two ideas: individualism and respect for reason. And as a consequence of that, a respect for markets, so a market economy. So those three aspects: reason, individualism, capitalism, or markets. Those are the three. And I call it Western civilization because it refers to a time and a place where this civilization was born. And then articulate what I mean by that. And I often, when I talk about Western civilization, I say, well, but that includes anybody who adopts these values. And I know that people associate with Christendom, but in my view, one of the most important battles that those of us who are fighting for civilization must fight and must win is to divorce civilization from Christianity. To show the world the Western civilization, the founding of America, is not a product of Christendom, but a product of the Enlightenment values, of Enlightenment ideas, of Enlightenment thinkers. And that they were primarily, dominantly secular. And that the key idea of the Enlightenment is in its alternative name. The Enlightenment is also called the Age of Reason. So if we're going to fight for civilization, one of the only ways we can do that is by separating the idea of Western civilization from Christianity. And I don't believe we should give up on that fight. I think it's an important fight. And I think it's important for the Koreans and for the Japanese and for some of the Chinese and whoever is adopting Western civilization to know what they're adopting. That is to identify the characteristics that they are taking from the West, that they're adopting from the West. Isn't it cultural expropriation? Ooh, I think we should go after the Koreans and the Chinese and all these people for it's our culture. Wait a minute, it's ours, right? We, Europeans. The cultural expropriation now, if you get dressed up like an Indian, or you get dressed up as or you eat, if you're European and you eat Japanese food, you're expropriating their culture, or you do fusion, and there's the left is like completely nuts and crazy and infantile about this. But they never talk about it in reverse. They never talk about the values other cultures take from the West, which is the dominant cultural so-called expropriation. But no, so I'm all for keeping Western civilization and identifying it as an 18th century phenomena, as a product of the Enlightenment, as a product that starts with Aquinas and the Renaissance and the rediscovery. Really, its roots are in Greece and the Greek identification of reason and individualism. That's what makes it so, and teaching that and talking about that. And I think Western civilization is not a shortcut for that, and we must fight the battle to separate it from the idea of Christianity. All right.
Okay. So other than his not very good jokes about cultural appropriation, whatever. I'm not, if all we were talking about with Western civilization was we need to defend individualism and reason, I wouldn't argue much against that. I think individualism and reason are phenomenal things. I really do. Okay, the problem is that the bulk of the commentators that you're hearing wanting to defend Western civilization are really, let's be honest, they're arguing for, no, we got to keep, the white race is dying, we got to keep that together, and blah, 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 and which is collectivism writ large. That's just so collectivistic, it makes your head spin. So that's not even defending individualism. Well, Yaron Brooks was saying, I mean, again, I get it. And as far as separating it from Christendom, fuck yes. Individualism and reason, those are not Christian ideas. I mean, I'm not saying Christianity didn't adopt them, but they're not exactly, they don't belong solely to Christianity. And that's really it, is that a lot of these things that people, if you try to pin people down about, okay, what do you mean by Western civilization? Western civilization has no claim, no claim to being the sole proprietors or sole espousers of these, or have sole ownership of these concepts of individualism and reason. In fact, maybe where a lot of modern concepts or modern arguments of Western civilization actually comes from a paper which turned into a whole book by Samuel P. Huntington called Clash of Civilizations. And in that, he even has like a whole map. Granted, he says some of these countries can be what he calls swing civilizations, where there's a difference between, like, they could kind of be Western if they just went this way, and they're not so stuck being Eastern or something like that. But within that book, I mean, Western civilization for him is the bulk of Western Europe, the bulk of North America minus Mexico, and then, like Australia and maybe New Guinea. That is what he labels as Western civilization at that time. However, within this book, in fact, if you look at his heat map, there's a country that's in pink, and that being Japan. Now, he argues within the book that Japan has achieved everything that Western civilization has, but it is absolutely not Western civilization, nor was it influenced by the Greeks, not even remotely fucking close. Okay, now, to get into the Greek conversation about this, the Greeks, and I don't know if I talked about this on a Sovereign Tech Prime episode, if it was on a Patreon episode, but there is tremendous research done, a couple of really great books out there too about it, that the Greeks could not have come up with all of these philosophical bases that everybody says, comes from the Greek, and comes from the ancient Greeks, and that's what Western civilization came out of. And don't even begin to argue for democracy. It failed in Greece, and obviously it's fucking failed in America. Okay, yeah, Trump is president. Democracy has failed. I mean, democracy, is a failure of a concept in the first place. Just it doesn't matter who's in office. It is a flawed, failed idea, just like any other government. But now, someone that obviously Ron Brooks is very much into capital O objectivism. Ayn Rand would talk often about Aristotle and, in kind of his mental progeny and so on, which, you could say St. Thomas Aquinas would fall under that and so on. The point I was going to get to, there is pretty great research done on the fact that, like, Aristotle would write about things, and also, his contemporaries would write about things, like even something as simple as a chariot. He would write about those as if they were something that the Greeks had. Here's the problem. The Greeks didn't have chariots at the time. So how did this happen? Well, what happened is that Plato, a lot of these other people, they learned from Greeks who went to, Plato's teachers and so on, who actually went to Egypt. These were all Egyptian concepts that they picked up on. The bulk of what people consider to be, I don't know if you want to call it the ancient Greek Enlightenment or, the social and philosophical advances within ancient Greece can easily be pointed to. There are easy corollaries centuries, if not 1,000 years before, found in Egypt. And most likely what happened was just the Greeks visited ancient Egypt. And, maybe after, Alexander did his business there, sitting with crook and flail like some kind of pharaoh. And, they just borrowed all of these Egyptian concepts. So, sorry, even the idea that these notions come from the Greeks is nonsense, and provably so. Or maybe you're the kind of person who thinks that Western civilization, and I'm just going with the foundations, and then I want to talk about a broader point here as well. Okay, but maybe you want to say, well, Western civilization comes out of that Judeo-Christian tradition. Fortunately, in recent years, and I don't know if I've had anything to do with this or if others have fortunately come out and kind of raised the flag on this matter. That's an ironic statement. But Anyway, now, yes, sure. I think what a lot of people consider to be Western civilization did come out of Christianity. It did not come out of Judaism, though. Even though people want to say that, or, even though the claim is accurate that Christianity came out of Judaism, but that doesn't necessarily mean Christianity has become a completely different animal from what Judaism was or is. Okay. And here's the thing, and some people have broken it down and said, well, we mean like early Jewish Christianity or maybe even, Hellenistic Jews or something. They're making it very clear. They're not talking about that Western civilization came out of, shall we say, the ancient Israelites or the Hebrews, kind of before like Jews was necessarily a term. And I appreciate that they're more accurate on that because guess who? There's a lot of funny things people don't realize about the Tanakh, with, the what Christians call the Old Testament. There's a lot of things that come out of that, a lot of concepts. One is, here's something do you know, and this is true whether you tack on the New Testament or not. Do you want to know who the only person the Bible calls a saint is? There's only one person in the entire Bible that gets called a saint. Aaron. Moses' brother. It's the only person called a saint. And if you're a believer, again, I'm an atheist, but if you're a believer, I mean, there's some hope in that because Aaron obviously wasn't the best guy, was he? But he gets called a saint. So anyway, now there is the term Messiah, right? Everybody, Messiah. Maybe if you're Christian, Jesus is your Messiah. Well, ironically, the Old Testament, or the Tanakh, more accurately, does claim someone else to be a Messiah, or the writings around the Tanakh actually claim someone to be Messiah, not Jesus. And do you want to know who that is? Cyrus the Great. Cyrus the Great. Who is Cyrus the Great? Cyrus the Great is the guy that founded the Persian Empire, a man of Iran. Eastern as they come, baby. And he's called Messiah, the highest possible fucking title outside of the Tetragrammaton that you could give to anything in existence. Was given to the East, was given to somebody from Eastern civilization, was given to a Persian, to an Iranian. So don't claim that, the Jews are somehow these bulwarks of Western civilization or something like that. No, they gave their highest titles to Eastern, within Eastern civilization, or what would be, to this day, I guess. But my point in saying that is that your foundational arguments for all this shit is dead wrong. Okay. And that's just a couple of points. I could do a whole episode about this. Okay. But now the rest I want to get into is that, so if Western civilization, these ideas of individualism and reason, if this is something that needs to be defended, okay, then let's defend individualism and reason. I want you to explain to me how a wall between the United States and Mexico, or I could say the United States and the United States, right? Because one's the United States of America, the other one is, the United States of Mexico. That's the technical term. Anyway, see, it's all the same. That a wall is somehow going to defend individualism and reason. No, it doesn't make any fucking sense at all. Of course it can't. And of course it won't. Ideas don't get defended by the butt of a gun. They don't get defended by walls. They don't get defended by any of that. What's that old saying that, how does it go? No army can stop an idea whose time has come. Well, guess what? No army can defend an idea either. Okay. I mean, it can't stop it. It can't defend it. These arguments just blow my mind. All right. Now, Yaron Brooks actually kind of brings up he makes the point that really anybody that accepts individualism and reason, okay, is on, or what he was saying, those would fall under Western civilization. Again, but in him saying that, he's almost admitting that there's no such thing as Western civilization. There's just people who accept the ideas of individualism and, and reason. Okay. And so you don't just throw out the term Western civilization. In fact, for him to argue for Western civilization, say, but we got to get away from Christendom, he just created another war where he's trying to, detach it from Christianity and so on. Just dump the whole fucking term. Okay. And if you want to say that you stand for individualism and reason, phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. In fact, you're not going to get a whole lot of argument from a lot of people today in the modern world because of, say, the advances in technology and the way that certain technologies have empowered the individual. people are inherently realizing that they are individuals and that they don't, they're just inherently realizing it, that they don't need, the collective. They don't need government, whatever that, because they got into Bitcoin. Suddenly they realize they don't need the Federal Reserve. And, and that mind fruit just keeps on growing until they realize, hey, shit, I don't need anybody over me. But when you say, oh, and we got to protect Western civilization and all that, then tell me where Western civilization is. Tell me when it started, and you'll break that down for me. Even if you go with Ron Brooks' statement of it being, from the 1800s or, from the 18th century, I guess the Enlightenment, so it'd be 1700s. And you go from there, it's like, okay, so all those countries, let's see, they have the highest murder count. They've killed more people in the history of civilization than any, of those atrocious Eastern empires ever did. What are you defending? Hitler came out of Western civilization. You go on the list of people that came out of Western civilization. What the fuck? So Yaron Brooks likes the term, I don't necessarily think he's racist. He's making those dumb cultural appropriation jokes, but whatever. Okay. But I think a lot of people use that term to and that's what it is. It's shrouded racism. They just want to use it. They want to say white, but they're saying Western civilization instead, because they're not coming out and saying we need to rescue individualism and reason. And folks, again, look, individualism and reason are not the sole purview of the ancient Greeks. In fact, the ancient Greeks didn't even come up with it in the first place. They just copied what the Egyptians had already, come to the conclusions of. There are other civilizations where it's in cultures, okay? Maybe you don't want to say civilization. You want to say Western culture. Fine, same term. Okay, same idea. There are other cultures where clearly individualism is the name of the game. Clearly reason is a part of the process. In fact, the reason that the Jews coming out of Babylonia after Cyrus the Great took over Babylon, or conquered Babylon, the reason the Jews called Cyrus Messiah is because he left them alone. He said, no, you don't have to become, one of my slave states or anything. You can go back to Jerusalem. You rebuild your temple. You go have yourselves a good time. Leave you alone. Go do your thing. He left them alone. There's no collectivism there, and that's, you get a lot of that out of the Persian Empire. But, and look, proponents of this word, of this term, Western civilization, they're not going to defend, the Persian Empire. In fact, they dare say that, when King Leonidas stood against, Xerxes and with his 300 men, that was the turning point of civilization. But that's nonsense. There is, look, I love the movie 300. I even appreciate the comic book and so on by Frank Miller. Hey, I get it. Okay. And I understand what's going on there, but that is such an ugly perspective. And it is just a perspective and interpretation of history that I don't know, that I personally, I don't think reflects reality whatsoever. Because the Greeks were far from that kind to other cultures and civilizations that they would end up conquering, in comparison to what the Persians allowed for. So look, just stop saying the Greeks were somehow special. Stop saying, I'm not saying that they weren't interesting in the annals of history, but they are not unique. Okay, I shouldn't say special. Stop saying that the Greeks are unique. Stop saying somehow America is unique and all these other things are unique. Individualism and reason does not require any of these countries, this national infrastructure. It doesn't need any of that. It didn't need any of these, shall we say, philosophical underpinnings, okay, to somehow, get to the point that they are today. Look, so even if you want to go like with Yaron Brooks and how he said, it's an outcropping of the Enlightenment. Okay. I want to give you a couple hints about the Enlightenment. First off, the Enlightenment sprung out of the desire to understand God. Okay. But what ended up coming out of that is that a lot of Enlightenment figures came to the conclusion, or if not the first generation, shall we say, of Enlightenment thinkers, then the next, came to the conclusion, wait a minute, there is no God, or like, wait, this concept of a creator that's, looking over us like a landlord. No, this landlord's absentee if he even exists. He's not there. So there's that point that came up. But the other initial concept that they were running with, and I don't see where they ever stopped thinking this. It's particularly, you can particularly see it in the works of Isaac Newton, but it is in others. Who is it? Thomas Knight and some of these other guys. where they didn't think they were discovering anything new. They thought they were rediscovering what the what ancient humans already knew, like the Egyptians and so on, which would explain why Isaac Newton was so hot about the Emerald Tablet and more. And this wasn't, I mean, it's not like the Florentine Renaissance, okay, where they thought that they were getting back to their Roman roots or something like that. I mean, they were looking back thousands of years. The Enlightenment thinkers thought that they were rediscovering stuff. And look, maybe they were rediscovering things from thousands of years previous. But then if that's true, then these, again, these philosophical underpinnings or these cultural underpinnings, say from the ancient Greeks or whatever, are bullshit. They're absolute bullshit. Even if you just want to attribute the Enlightenment or attribute Western culture and Western civilization and the concepts of individualism and reason to the Enlightenment was telling you these are ancient ideas that have already been around. So you're just dead fucking wrong. So what I'm saying to you is individualism and reason are two beautiful, wonderful things. Individualism may be the most important concept to humanity, okay? But stop attributing it to some culture. Stop attributing it to some supposed race, to white skin. Stop, attributing it to a geographic area. Stop attributing it to people who are copying other people like Aristotle and Plato and so on. Stop attributing it to, it's innate. It is a biological function. Individualism, we know these things deep down. We just have a culture that sometimes tells us differently. Okay? We know that we're an individual. We know that we're alone. Okay, I mean, we're a social species at the same time, but we're a social species because we know we're alone, and to survive and to thrive in life, we need others, and that's, maybe that's where love comes from and a lot of other things. Anyway, that's getting into a whole other conversation. But individualism and reason, I mean, look, if our ancient ancestors, even the Paleolithic ancestors, not even Neolithic, forget about even farming, okay, if they did not use reason, if they did not have a perfect grasp of reality and pay attention to everything going around them and to understand cause and effect, which are the basis of reason, they wouldn't have survived. This is why I say that like ancient humans, they weren't religious at all. That was like a new concept that got put on them, and that's another historical conversation as well. But that's a new concept that got put on them, because if they believed in the supernatural in any way, they were food for a saber-toothed tiger, or they were going to get trampled on by a herd of woolly mammoths. They wouldn't have survived. They had to pay absolute attention to their environment. They had no choice, otherwise we never would have gotten here. Individualism and reason, they're just it's part of the human condition. It's what we are. There is no culture that created it. You could say there's cultures that have venerated it a bit more than others. I mean, and you could get into, I know some people talk about how, well, the difference between cultures in geographic areas where rice was the primary crop and wheat was the primary crop, and that cultures where rice was the primary crop and maybe slavery wasn't so much the name of the game, that because you still need more than one person to harvest wheat, but that where since rice is more of a communal crop, or it's required to be communal, that created cultures that weren't so individualistic. I think Japan and even Samuel P. Huntington would agree with this, proves that dead wrong. I mean, that's just not true. But I understand the argument around that might lend to a certain mindset. And then, the idea of wheat. But look, anywhere that there's a grocery store, and guess what? Even in North Korea, there are fucking grocery stores. Like those kind of concepts just fall away inside of a generation. So, these ideas that individualism and reason are the sole purview of a certain group of people or a certain type of person or something like that is just utter fucking nonsense, because, it's so easy for a human to realize it and recognize it from the inside innately going forward. So let's just drop it. If you want to say you're defending something, say you're defending humanity, and stop fucking killing people and stop putting walls between us. Stop. And stop making it us against them or anything like that. We're all just human. Western civilization be damned. Anyway, that's it for, Western civilization be damned. Individualism and reason For the win, baby. Fuck yes. I am so on board with that. That's what sovereign tech's all about, is individualism and reason. Absolutely. So anyway, that's it for this week. I just wanted to get that off my chest. So what does Western civilization, I guess I should come out with some kind of conclusion. What does Western civilization mean? It means nothing. It means absolutely nothing. It's not a reference to jack shit or anything impressive whatsoever. I mean, yes, human achievement is impressive, but it's not, I shouldn't say impressive. It's not a reference to anything unique at all. So just drop the term. If we're not going to use cyberspace because it mentions government in it, drop Western civilization, because it does far more harm than good. And it's a shifting term that makes no sense whatsoever when you finally get down to the core of it. It has no real historical basis, and something I was going to bring up as far as this goes. There was a classic book. I'll end with this because I know we're running a little long. Okay. There was a classic book called The Decline of Western Civilization from 1918 by Oswald Spengler, okay? And in that, ironically, now he makes a lot of these cases, again, I think that they're all nonsense, but what is interesting is that he concludes that starting in the year 2000, Western civilization would truly fall apart. And that makes me wonder a little bit, because I understand what most racists and other people who actually don't believe, I mean, I'm sorry, it's just so easy to pick on, because like Western civilization is for individualism, but if you have to defend it, that's a collectivist act. Like that Western civilization, that the very term is collectivist. It's not individualistic at all, or it has nothing to do with individualism. There's so many fucking problems with this. But the point I was going to get at, I mean, that is it. I know what people mean when they say that, and it is weird that, what people see falling away, like Christianity and, kind of more conservative holds on ideals and everything, that is falling away. And Oswald Spengler kind of got that on the nose. I wonder what that's all about. You can share your thoughts with me. And hey, maybe just like the guy did about cyberspace, you could change my mind. Give it a shot. Email me before you walk away. Try and convince me otherwise, or give me a better argument. I'd love to talk about it. All right, that's it for this week's episode of Sovereign Tech. A very unconventional episode of Sovereign Tech, but I like to shake things up here and there. I will see all of you on the other side.
You just experienced Sovryn Tech. Go to sovryntech.com, that's SOVRYN tech.com, and connect with us there. Find links from today's show and catch our podcast feed. Sovryn Tech is copy heart. Copying art is an act of love, and love is not subject to law. So please share the show however you like. Welcome to the evolution.